All right. Next topic, why main? This is kind of a tangent, kind of related, but real quick, this also covers some stuff about main that is relevant. So, yeah, why main? Very simple question I had back when I was first learning C. Why is it called main? Why do we have to define a main for our programs to work, right? That was very confusing for me, especially coming off of Python. I'm sure some of you guys have the same doubt as well, right? So, if you recall our hello world program, which I have right here, we can see that I am saying int main and then I'm returning 0. Why do I have to do all that, right? So, before we get to that part, let's just define a function in math, right? Let's take sine inverse of x. So sine inverse of x takes some input x and then it gives you some output, which is the inverse sine of x, which is going to be in degree or radians or whatever. And now you have a few constraints for the input x. X must be within 1 or minus 1 or 1. Otherwise, the sine inverse does not have a real answer, right? Or let's say y, right? Y is going to be either the principal value or maybe it's not the principal value, or y can be a set of values. So you have sine inverse of x, right? You give it some input, which is x, and then you get some output y. And x has to abide by some things, y has to abide by some things that is up to the function being used, right? A function in programming is very, very similar. A function in programming takes in some input and produces some output. Sometimes a function may take in no input at all, and sometimes it may produce no output at all. That is also completely possible. Okay. And a function may produce an error. For example, x needs to belong to minus 1 and 1, right, for sine inverse to work. If x does not belong to that range, sine inverse will not yield a real answer. So that can be analogous to an error in our case. All right, back to our question of why main. We know what a function is now. So we can think of main as a function. So main can be a function that takes in some input or takes in no input. Specifically, if main takes input, it has to be two very specific things called command line arguments. You can just pause and read here. I have explained it a little bit. We'll be touching on command line arguments in depth later. Uh, but yeah, you can have some input which are command line arguments, or you can not have any input at all for main. Now the output of main. If we look here, we are returning 0. So the output of main is a number or an integer, right? So that's the input and output part. The output of main is called an exit code of a program. The exit code has a very specific functionality. It tells the operating system whether a program ran successfully or not. If a program ran successfully, the exit code is going to be 0. If it failed due to some reason or the other, it's going to be some non-zero value. Different values like represent different errors. One could mean a different error, two could mean another error, minus 127 could mean another error, and so on, right? All right. So we know what a function is. We have looked at main as a function. So our C programs start executing from main. I'm pretty sure you know that by now just from running C code, right? So because they start there, it is called the entry point. But still, why main? Yeah. just because. Okay, just because just means convention here. Conventionally, main is the entry point of a program in C and in most other compiled languages or in most other languages that have a concept of an entry point, right? You can tell the compiler to say, hey, use this other function as the entry point of my program. Or you can use this flag right here, this thing. Just replace your alternative entry point with the actual function name, right? You can do that, but it's discouraged because main is conventionally what everything looks for, and if it might not always work after you've compiled it, right? There's a reason it's main, and there's a reason it's default. Just follow it. But still, why? Keep going, right? Okay, main probably stuck around from IBM PCs when they were creating Unix in days olden, probably before your parents were born. So Unix didn't have this idea of an entry point, right? And that caused a lot of problems. I don't have the time to go into an example right now, but I would suggest you read into it. Very interesting, useless for C. So yeah, that caused a lot of problems. So they introduced an entry point concept. This entry point concept had to have a name, and that name just probably stuck around from IBM PCs which were around at the time, and they called it main, right? IBM PCs had a main coroutine, a main routine that would run. And then C also took main as a entry point because Unix and C were created by the same people. Fine. And then pretty much every other language that followed used main. Alright, now the variations of main. This bit is actually relevant for your exams and stuff. So variations of main, you have int main and void main at the top level. And then you can have with command line arguments or without command line arguments. The use of void main is very discouraged. Void main is discouraged for the reason that it does not return anything. Void basically means, I mean, what does it mean in English? Void, emptiness, or the lack of stuff, right? So void main tells that the main function is going to not return any value at all. And as I've said before, the main function's return value is very useful for the operating system to find out if a program executed successfully or not. So yeah, so the exit code of main is useful. So int main is preferred over void main. Just a quick example. If I say compile hello world, I can do echo status, and that gives me a status of 0 because we return 0. If I quickly edit this to return 1, if I compile it again and run it and see the status, it will be 1 because I edited it to return 1, right? Uh, Note that in bash and stuff, it's actually the variable is question mark and not status, so you do echo $ question mark. And then command and PowerShell have their own syntax for getting the status of the last executed program, right? So that's how you can access it, exit codes from the shell. And when argc and argv, that was the command line arguments I was talking about. So argc is an integer and argv is an array of strings. You don't need to worry about how to do stuff with them. We'll touch on it later. If you want a little introduction, you can just pause and read right here. And that concludes it for why main.